The small restaurant on the corner of the busy street smelled of coffee, baked bread, and fried food. It was not a fancy place, but every table was always full. The sound of clinking plates, soft music, and people talking filled the air. In the middle of it all moved a young woman with tired eyes but a warm smile. Her name was Sarah. Sarah worked as a waitress there almost every day from morning till late evening. She was only 22, but life had already given her more burdens than most people her age. Her father had passed away when she was a child, and her mother, who raised her alone, had also left the world when Sarah was just a teenager. Since then, she carried the responsibility of taking care of her younger brother. She needed money for rent, school fees, and food, so she took this job at the restaurant. The work was never easy. Sometimes the customers were kind and sometimes they were rude. Sometimes the tips were good, but other days she went home with almost nothing extra in her pocket. But no matter what, she always kept her head up and smiled. She had learned one thing from her mother. Life can be hard, but you should never let it take away your kindness. Every morning, before leaving for work, Sarah would put on a small silver pendant that hung on a thin chain around her neck. It was old, scratched, and simple, but for Sarah it was the most precious thing in the world. It belonged to her mother, and before passing away, her mother had given it to her with a soft whisper. "This will always keep me close to you." From that day, Sarah never took it off, no matter where she went. At the restaurant, some people noticed the pendant and asked about it. Sarah would only smile and say, "It was my mother's. I keep it because it reminds me of her." She never gave long explanations, but deep in her heart, that little piece of silver gave her strength whenever she felt weak. The restaurant manager, Mr. Cole, was not a kind man. He was strict and often spoke in a sharp voice. He cared more about speed and order than about the feelings of his staff. To him, Sarah was just another employee. If she did well, he rarely praised her. If she made even a small mistake, he noticed it instantly. Still, Sarah never answered back. She quietly accepted his harsh words and tried harder the next day. Other waiters sometimes whispered about how unfair the manager was, but Sarah never joined in. She believed complaining would not solve anything. Instead, she focused on her work, cleaning tables, carrying heavy trays, remembering long orders, and making sure every customer felt cared for. Many regular visitors liked her gentle manner and asked for her section whenever they came in, but behind that smile, Sarah was often tired. At night, when she finally reached home, she would sit on her small bed and count the money she earned. Some nights she worried it would not be enough for rent. Some nights she cried silently, thinking of her mother and how much easier life felt when she was alive. Yet she never showed that side to anyone at the restaurant. There she was, the hard-working waitress who never forgot to say thank you with a smile. One Thursday evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. A local event had ended nearby and many people had come in for dinner. Every table was full and the waiters rushed between the kitchen and the dining hall. Sarah's tray was stacked with plates of pasta, glasses of juice, and steaming bowls of soup. Her feet ached, but she kept moving quickly and politely. At one corner table, a man in a dark suit sat quietly. He did not seem like the others who laughed loudly and ordered extra food. He looked calm, watching the room with a thoughtful expression. Sarah noticed him only once when she refilled his glass with water. He nodded politely, but she did not realize then how important he would soon become in her story. The night was long, and though Sarah felt her energy fading, she kept her pace. She knew that she had to give her best every day. Life had already taught her that opportunities were rare, and losing one could mean weeks of struggle. She thought of her younger brother, waiting at home with his schoolbook spread on the table, and that gave her the courage to keep moving. While working, the pendant sometimes slipped out from under her uniform and shone under the restaurant's warm lights. Sarah often touched it gently before rushing back into the crowd of customers. That tiny gesture reminded her of her mother's words and filled her heart with comfort. But on that particular night, things were about to change. The busy hall, the clattering dishes, and the tired waiters created an atmosphere full of stress. Sarah, unaware of what the future held, continued to serve everyone with the same patience she always carried. She could never have guessed that her life was only moments away from a storm that would bring both pain and an unexpected chance of hope. The world outside the restaurant carried on. Cars passing, streetlights glowing, people walking home. But inside, the story of a young waitress, her treasured pendant, and a stranger's hidden recognition was silently unfolding. For Sarah, it was still just another evening at work, yet it was the evening that would turn her life upside down. The restaurant was still full of noise and movement when the evening grew heavier. Waiters rushed between tables, the kitchen bell rang again and again, and the manager's sharp voice echoed through the hall. Sarah carried another tray filled with drinks and plates, weaving carefully through the crowd. She had already been on her feet for almost 10 hours, but she did not let her exhaustion show. To the customers, she remained polite, steady, and ready to serve. At one table, a group of young men laughed loudly. They snapped their fingers to call her, asked for more bread, and then changed their order twice. Sarah did not complain. She smiled and wrote down the changes quickly, then hurried to the kitchen. On her way back, another family waved at her for extra napkins. She nodded and rushed to fetch them too. Her arms ached, but her mind kept telling her to stay calm. The manager, Mr. Cole, stood near the counter watching everyone closely. He had a habit of glaring at his staff, especially at Sarah. He often acted as if she could never do enough. That evening, he looked more impatient than usual. The restaurant's sudden rush of customers had made him nervous, and instead of helping, he walked around pointing out mistakes. "Sarah, faster!" he barked when she stopped for a second to catch her breath. "Yes, sir," she answered softly and hurried on. She balanced a tray with 3 bowls of soup, carefully lowering them onto a table where a couple sat. But as she turned, one of the young men at the noisy table stretched his arm without looking and bumped into her. The tray shook and a spoon clattered to the ground. Nothing spilled, but the sound was loud enough for the manager to notice. Mr. Cole stormed over, his face tight with irritation. "Sarah," he snapped, "how many times have I told you to watch what you're doing? This is a restaurant, not your home kitchen." The customers nearby looked up, some surprised, some uncomfortable. Sarah bent quickly, picked up the spoon and whispered, "I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." But Mr. Cole did not lower his voice. Instead, he raised it. "Sorry doesn't pay for mistakes. You've been here long enough. If you still can't handle a simple shift, maybe this job isn't for you." Sarah's cheeks burned. She wanted to explain that it was not her fault, but she stayed silent. She knew speaking back would only make things worse. She turned to return the tray to the counter, hoping the matter would end there. Yet the manager followed her. "I'm tired of your excuses," he said loudly, making sure the whole room could hear. "This is the last straw. You're fired, Sarah. Pick up your things and leave. Right now!" For a moment, Sarah froze. The words hit her harder than the long hours or the aching feet. Fired? In the middle of her shift? In front of everyone? Her throat tightened as she looked around the room. Customers whispered to each other. Waiters exchanged nervous glances, and the noise in the restaurant seemed to dim. Her hands trembled as she placed the empty tray on the counter. She felt her face grow hot, but her body cold. Losing this job meant losing rent money, losing her brother's school fees, and losing the only steady income she had. She wanted to beg for another chance, but pride kept her lips closed. She could not let these people see her cry. Slowly, she untied her apron. As she did, the chain of her pendant slipped forward, the small silver charm resting on her uniform for all to see. She pressed it between her fingers for comfort, whispering to herself, "Stay strong." In one corner of the restaurant, the quiet man in the dark suit had been watching everything. When the manager shouted, he noticed the young waitress's expression, the hurt, the struggle to keep her dignity, the silent strength. But what caught his eye most was the pendant that swung gently from her neck as she bent to place the apron on the counter. His heart skipped. His eyes fixed on the silver pendant. For a second, he could not breathe. That pendant, he recognized it. It looked exactly like one he had seen years ago, worn by someone who had once changed his life forever. His hand tightened around his glass of water and his face turned pale. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Could it be the same? Or was it only a coincidence? He had to know. Meanwhile, Sarah stood still, trying to gather her courage. The other waiters looked away, too afraid to say anything. The customers whispered more loudly now, some disapproving of the manager's behavior, others too curious to care. Sarah swallowed her pain and took a step toward the door. Just then the quiet man raised his hand. "Excuse me," he said in a calm but firm voice. Everyone turned. His voice carried authority, the kind that made people listen. He looked directly at Sarah. "Young lady, may I ask you something before you go?" Sarah stopped, surprised. She looked at him, unsure whether to answer. Mr. Cole frowned, irritated that a customer had interrupted. "Sir, I'm sorry for the disturbance," he said quickly, trying to brush it off. "This employee is no longer with us. Please don't mind," but the man ignored him. He kept his eyes on Sarah. "That pendant you're wearing," he said slowly, pointing gently. "Where did you get it?" The room grew quiet again. Sarah instinctively touched the pendant, holding it tightly. It felt strange to be asked about it by a stranger in front of everyone. But something in his tone was not rude or nosy. It was serious, almost emotional. "It was my mother's," Sarah said softly. "She gave it to me before she passed away." The man's face grew even paler. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something but stopped. His eyes softened, filled with memory and recognition. The restaurant around him seemed to fade as he stared at the pendant. Sarah shifted nervously. She had no idea why her simple pendant mattered so much to him. She only wanted to leave quietly, but now all eyes were on her again. Mr. Cole stepped forward impatiently. "Sir, please. This matter doesn't concern you. She has caused enough trouble tonight. Let's move on." But the man in the suit finally spoke again, his voice firm. "No," he said, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "This does concern me, more than you can imagine." And with those words, the entire atmosphere of the restaurant changed. The restaurant was still buzzing, yet the focus of everyone's eyes had shifted. The man in the suit had stood up, his tall frame casting a quiet authority over the scene. He did not raise his voice, but the weight of his words made everyone stop and listen. Sarah stood frozen near the door, her apron folded in her hands, the pendant warm against her skin where her trembling fingers held it. She could not understand why a stranger cared so much about the little piece of silver she wore every day. To her, it was only a memory of her mother. To him, it seemed like something more. The billionaire, though no one in the restaurant yet realized who he really was, took a slow step toward her. His eyes were locked on the pendant, but his voice was gentle. "Young lady," he said, "may I ask, what was your mother's name?" Sarah hesitated. The sudden attention felt uncomfortable, but his eyes did not seem unkind. They were searching, almost desperate. She whispered, "Her name was Emily." The man's hand tightened around the back of the chair he had just left. His breath caught in his throat. Emily. The name brought back memories he had buried deep inside. He remembered a cold night, a terrible accident, and a woman who had risked her life to save his. She had worn the exact same pendant, shining faintly under the streetlight as she helped him out of the wreckage. He had wanted to thank her properly, but she had disappeared from his world before he ever got the chance. And now, years later, here stood her daughter, fired, humiliated, and broken in front of everyone. The billionaire closed his eyes for a moment. It was almost too much to believe. He whispered softly, more to himself than to anyone else, "Emily's daughter?" Sarah's heart beat faster. She had heard his words but did not understand. "You knew my mother?" she asked carefully. The man nodded slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," he said. "Your mother once saved my life." The entire restaurant gasped. Waiters stopped moving, customers leaned closer to hear, and even the kitchen door remained half open as the cooks peeked through. Mr. Cole, the manager, frowned, confused and annoyed that the spotlight was slipping away from his authority. Sarah stared at the stranger, her eyes wide. She had always known her mother was kind, brave, and selfless, but she had never heard this story. "You must be mistaken," she said gently. "My mother, she was just an ordinary woman." The man smiled sadly. "Ordinary?" "No, she was extraordinary. And she carried that pendant around her neck the night I met her. I could never forget it." The room fell silent again. Sarah clutched the pendant even tighter, her emotions swirling. A small part of her wanted to cry because someone still remembered her mother so deeply. Another part of her was confused. Why was this stranger here now, and why did it feel like fate had pulled their lives together? Mr. Cole broke the silence with an impatient tone. "Sir, with respect, this has nothing to do with tonight. This young woman made mistakes, and I cannot allow—" "Enough," the man interrupted firmly, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. He turned toward the manager, his eyes sharp and commanding. "Do you have any idea who she is? Do you have any idea whose daughter you just humiliated in front of everyone?" Mr. Cole faltered, blinking rapidly. She's just an employee," he muttered. The man stepped closer to Sarah, his expression softening again. "No," he said quietly. "She is Emily's daughter, and that makes her someone far greater than you realize." Sarah lowered her head, overwhelmed. Her hands shook as she tried to hide her face. She was not used to anyone speaking for her, let alone a wealthy, powerful stranger. The man turned back to the crowd, his voice steady. Years ago, when I was nothing but a broken man on the edge of death, her mother saved me. She gave me another chance to live, to build, to become the man I am today. Everything I have, my success, my fortune, my very breath, I owe to her. And tonight I cannot stand by while her daughter is treated this way. Gasps filled the restaurant again. Whispers ran quickly between the tables. "Isn't that?" one customer murmured. "It's him, the billionaire. The one we read about in the papers." Recognition spread like fire. People began to realize they were in the presence of one of the richest and most respected men in the country. Cameras on phones started to rise, capturing the moment. Mr. Cole's face drained of color. Sweat formed on his forehead as he stammered, "Sir, I didn't know. If I had known, I never—" The billionaire raised his hand, silencing him instantly. "You should not need to know who she is to treat her with dignity. Every person deserves respect no matter their position. You failed her as an employer and as a human being." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She had never expected anyone to defend her, especially not someone so important. All she had wanted was to keep her job and earn enough for her brother's future. And yet here she was, standing in the middle of a restaurant where everything had changed in a single moment. The man looked at her pendant one last time, then met her eyes. "Your mother once told me something," he said softly. "She said kindness is the only thing we can leave behind that will never be forgotten. Tonight I see that in you. You have her spirit." Sarah's lips trembled. She wanted to say something, but the words would not come. She only managed a quiet thank you as her tears finally spilled over. The billionaire gave a small nod. Then turning back to the stunned crowd, he said, "I will make sure this young woman does not leave here in shame. Her mother's legacy deserves more than that, and she deserves more than this place has ever given her." For the first time in her life, Sarah felt the weight of her struggles begin to shift. The humiliation of being fired still lingered, but it was wrapped now in something unexpected. Hope. The same pendant she had carried every day, the small silver charm she thought was only a memory, had opened a door she never knew existed. The restaurant had turned into a stage where her life was no longer invisible. The story was no longer just about a waitress losing her job. It was about a daughter unknowingly carrying her mother's light, and a man who finally recognized it after years of silence. What would happen next? She did not know. But as she stood there, pendant shining under the restaurant lights, one thing became clear. Her life was no longer the same. The restaurant was unusually quiet after the billionaire's words. Customers and staff alike were still processing what had just happened. The manager, Mr. Cole, stood frozen, unsure whether to defend himself or retreat. Sarah, meanwhile, still clutched her pendant, feeling a strange mix of fear, relief, and curiosity. She could hardly believe that a stranger had recognized the very necklace her mother had worn years ago. The memory of her mother seemed to breathe again through that small silver charm. The billionaire, whose name was James, moved closer to Sarah and lowered his voice, speaking as if no one else existed in the room. "Sarah," he said gently, "I need to explain something to you. Your mother saved my life years ago. She was incredibly brave and she never sought recognition. That pendant, it was the last thing I saw when she helped me. I never forgot her, and I never forgot the kindness she showed me." Sarah's eyes widened. She had always known her mother was kind and courageous, but she had never imagined that her actions had impacted someone so profoundly. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time in years she felt that her mother's memory was not just a story from the past. It was alive and powerful in the present. I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She never told me to be brave. She just always wanted me to be good." James smiled warmly. "That is exactly why she was remarkable. You inherited that spirit. You carry it in every action, every choice. I see it in you tonight." Meanwhile, the customers who had witnessed the scene whispered among themselves. Some had already recognized James, the billionaire, who was known for both his generosity and success. Others were simply stunned by the unusual drama unfolding before their eyes. Phones were being raised discreetly, but James did not seem concerned with them. His focus remained solely on Sarah, as if he were seeing her for the first time. Mr. Cole finally found his voice, though it was weak and shaking. "Sir, She made mistakes. That's why. James turned slowly, his expression firm and unyielding. Mistakes do not define a person, and humiliation does not build character. She has been working hard, serving people and doing her best every day. You, sir, have failed her. His tone left no room for argument. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had never been defended like this before. Even in school, even in her first jobs, she had faced criticism, but no one had ever spoken so strongly on her behalf. A strange warmth filled her chest, hope, courage, and a sense of justice all wrapped together. James placed a hand gently on her shoulder. I want to help you, he said softly. Not because you need money or success, but because your mother's legacy deserves to continue through you. I want to give you an opportunity to fulfill the potential I see in you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, this time falling freely down her cheeks. She could hardly speak, but she managed a small, trembling voice. I don't know how to thank you. I've only tried to survive, to take care of my brother. I never expected this. James smiled, a warm, understanding smile. You do not need to thank me. I am simply giving back what was given to me long ago. Your mother saved me, and now it is my turn to honor her. The tension in the room began to ease. The customers, the other waiters, and even Mr. Cole watched silently as the scene unfolded. Some felt awe, others shame at how they had judged Sarah. But the focus remained on her, and for the first time, she felt seen, not just for her work, not just as a waitress, but as the daughter of a remarkable woman who had changed the life of a stranger forever. James took out his phone and quietly made a call. Sarah could not hear the conversation, but she guessed that it was important. After a few minutes, he ended the call and turned back to her. I have arranged something for you. A chance to grow, learn, and step into a future that matches the courage and kindness you carry. You will not have to struggle alone anymore. Sarah's mind raced. She thought of her brother, the bills, the long hours, the endless worry, and yet for the first time, she imagined a life where she could dream bigger, where she could make choices without fear, a life where her mother's legacy could shine through her. Sir, she began, but her words caught in her throat. The emotions were too strong, too overwhelming. She only nodded, letting her tears fall, feeling a sense of relief she had never known. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It will be okay, he said. You have already shown strength by surviving all these years. Now it's time to let the world see the full person you are. Meanwhile, the restaurant staff began to relax, realizing that the moment of humiliation had been replaced by something remarkable. Even Mr. Cole seemed to shrink in the corner, realizing that his harsh treatment had been wrong and unnecessary. But he did not say anything. The room no longer belonged to him. Sarah's thoughts wandered to her mother. She imagined Emily smiling down at her, proud of how she had handled herself tonight. She realized that the struggles, the tears, the hard work, and the loneliness had all prepared her for this moment. The pendant around her neck was no longer just a keepsake. It was a symbol of resilience, courage, and the invisible thread connecting her past, present, and future. James continued to speak softly, as if sharing a secret between the two of them. I want you to understand something important. Life will not always be easy, but your choices will define your path. You can choose fear or you can choose courage. You have already chosen courage without even realizing it. Now I want to help you take the next steps. Sarah listened carefully. Each word seemed to carve itself into her heart, giving her strength she had never felt before. For years she had believed that her life would always be a struggle, that she would always be trapped in long shifts, unpaid bills, and sleepless nights. But now she understood that life had a way of surprising those who stayed true to themselves. Slowly, she looked around the restaurant. The customers, once critical or indifferent, now watched with admiration. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the unexpected story unfolding before them. Others whispered softly about the importance of kindness, integrity, and seeing people for who they truly are, not just their jobs or mistakes. James finally stepped back slightly, giving her space to breathe. You are ready for this, he said, and you deserve it more than you know. Your mother's courage lives in you, Sarah. Never forget that. Sarah's chest swelled with emotion. The pain of being fired, the embarrassment of the moment all seemed to melt away. She realized that life had tested her, but it had also prepared her for something extraordinary. She could feel the presence of her mother in that small silver pendant, guiding her, supporting her, reminding her that strength and kindness were her true inheritance. In that moment, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would honor her mother's memory not only by surviving but by thriving. She would carry forward the spirit of courage, generosity, and integrity that her mother had shown to the world. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never forget the lessons of this day, the day her life began to change. The restaurant, once a place of routine and struggle, had become the scene of a turning point, a place where the past, present, and future converged. And at the center of it all, Sarah stood tall, her eyes shining with hope, her heart ready for the next chapter. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a strange mixture of excitement and disbelief. The events of the previous evening still felt like a dream. She could still see the restaurant, the whispering customers, and James, the billionaire, looking at her pendant with such intensity that it had seemed almost magical. Her hand instinctively touched the small silver charm, feeling its familiar weight and comfort. She took a deep breath, realizing that her life had truly begun to change. Her younger brother Michael was still asleep in the small bedroom they shared. He had no idea that the night before had altered their lives forever. Sarah quietly got up, tiptoeing around their small apartment, trying not to wake him. She prepared breakfast and packed a small bag, because today was not just another ordinary day. Today she would meet James again, and this time, she did not know what to expect. When she arrived at the address James had given her, she found herself standing in front of a large office building, one that seemed almost like something from a storybook. Her heart pounded as she entered, unsure if she truly belonged here. The receptionist smiled at her warmly and said, "Mr. James is expecting you. Please come this way." Sarah nodded, clutching her pendant and trying to steady her nerves. Inside his office, James waited patiently. He greeted her with the same calm, kind demeanor that had struck her the night before. "Sarah, I'm glad you came," he said. "Today we begin a new chapter for you. I want you to know that your mother's bravery and kindness will continue through you, and I want to help make that possible." Sarah listened carefully, trying to take in every word. She felt a mixture of awe, hope, and nervousness. She had never imagined that her life could take such a turn. The opportunities she had dreamed of, even in the quiet moments when she allowed herself to imagine a better future, seemed suddenly within reach. James explained that he had arranged for her to receive support in several ways. First, he would cover her education, so she could pursue skills and knowledge that would open doors she had only imagined. Second, he would provide her with a mentorship program, guiding her through professional and personal growth. Finally, he offered her a position in a foundation he had started, a place dedicated to helping others who faced struggles similar to hers. Sarah's eyes widened. She had never been offered anything like this before. She felt tears welling up again, but this time they were not tears of shame or fear. They were tears of joy and gratitude. She thought of her mother, imagining her smiling down, proud of the daughter who had survived so much and now had a chance to thrive. James smiled as he noticed her reaction. "This is not a handout, Sarah," he said gently. "It is an opportunity for you to grow, to honor your mother, and to carry her courage forward. Life has already tested you, and you have proven that you have strength, patience, and kindness. Now it is time to use that strength to create a future that reflects who you truly are." Sarah felt a wave of determination wash over her. For years she had lived cautiously, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of failing. Now she realized that mistakes were not the end. They were lessons, just as her mother had always tried to teach her. She nodded firmly, feeling her heart swell with purpose. I will do my best," she said softly but confidently. "I won't waste this chance." Over the following weeks, Sarah's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. She attended workshops and classes, learning new skills and gaining confidence in herself. She discovered talents she had never known she had, from public speaking to organizing projects, and she realized that the perseverance she had developed while working long hours as a waitress had prepared her for much more than she had ever imagined. Meanwhile, she continued to work at the foundation James had introduced her to. She met people from all walks of life, many of whom faced hardships similar to hers, and she felt a deep connection to them. She understood their struggles and could guide them with empathy and wisdom far beyond her years. Every day she carried her mother's spirit in her actions, and every small success reminded her that courage and kindness could create ripple effects far beyond what she could see. Michael noticed the changes in his sister as well. Sarah seemed lighter, happier, and more confident. She still cared for him with the same dedication, but now she spoke of dreams and plans instead of worries and bills. For the first time, he saw a future where they could both thrive, not just survive. News of Sarah's story began to spread quietly, through small interviews and articles about her work with the foundation. People were inspired not just by the support of a billionaire, but by her own courage and perseverance. They admired how she had faced humiliation and hardship, yet remained kind, humble, and strong. She became a symbol of hope for those who felt trapped by their circumstances, showing that resilience and integrity could lead to extraordinary opportunities. One day, Sarah returned to the restaurant where her journey had taken such a dramatic turn. She walked through the doors with confidence, not as the timid, exhausted waitress she once was, but as a young woman proud of who she had become. The staff recognized her immediately, and customers who remembered the previous incident stared in surprise and admiration. James had accompanied her, but he stayed quietly in the background, allowing Sarah to shine. She walked past Mr. Cole, who now looked small and regretful, and she simply nodded politely, choosing forgiveness rather than confrontation. The staff whispered among themselves, inspired by her poise and grace. Sarah stood near the tables, taking a deep breath. She noticed her pendant resting on her chest, catching the light. It was still her mother's, still a simple silver charm, but now it felt like a talisman of courage, perseverance, and love. She realized that her mother's spirit had guided her every step of the way, from the long shifts at the restaurant to this new life filled with promise and purpose. She thought back to the moment she had been fired, humiliated in front of everyone. At the time, it had felt like the end of the world, but now she understood that it had been a turning point, a moment that led her to discover her true strength and destiny. Life had tested her, but it had also given her a remarkable gift, a chance to carry her mother's legacy forward and to inspire others along the way. As the day ended, Sarah looked at James and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for what you did for me, but for reminding me that life can be brighter than we ever imagine, even after the darkest moments." James nodded, his eyes warm with pride. "Your mother's courage lives in you, Sarah. You have only begun to discover what you are capable of. Remember this: every act of kindness, every choice to be brave adds to the world in ways you may never see. Carry that knowledge forward, and you will honor her in ways more powerful than you can imagine." Sarah left the restaurant that evening with Michael by her side. They walked home together, not burdened by fear or uncertainty, but filled with hope and purpose. She knew that challenges would still come, as they always do, but she also knew that she had the strength, courage, and support to face them. Life was no longer about simply surviving. It was about thriving, making choices that mattered, and carrying forward the legacy of the people who had shaped her. The little silver pendant rested against her chest, glinting softly in the fading sunlight. It had begun as a simple keepsake, a reminder of her mother's love, but now it had become a symbol of everything she had overcome and everything she was destined to achieve. Sarah understood that her journey had only just begun, but for the first time, she felt ready to embrace it fully with courage, kindness, and an unwavering belief in the power of hope. And so, the young waitress who had been fired in front of everyone became a woman whose life inspired others. Through courage, kindness, and perseverance, she transformed her own story and honored her mother's legacy in ways she had never imagined. What had begun as a moment of despair became the start of a future full of promise, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, hope can shine through, and ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.